Robert Caldwell stood in his son's bedroom, exactly as it had been left 7 months ago. Baseball trophies lined the shelf. A half-finished model airplane hung, suspended from fishing line on the ceiling, and a faded Boston Red Sox poster curled slightly at the corners. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. Robert ran his fingers along the edge of the desk, collecting a thin film of dust. "I should clean in here," he muttered to himself, but he knew he wouldn't. Cleaning meant accepting that Michael wasn't coming back, that the car accident that took his 17-year-old son was permanent, irreversible. At 52, Robert had lost everything that mattered. First his wife to cancer 3 years ago, and now Michael. The suburban house in Worcester, Massachusetts felt cavernous, each room an echo chamber of memories. The construction company he'd built from the ground up over 20 years now ran practically without him, his business partner handling most of the day-to-day operations, while Robert functioned on autopilot. The doorbell rang, startling him from his thoughts. Standing on his porch was Margaret, his next-door neighbor, a retired elementary school teacher who had brought him casseroles and checked in on him regularly since the funeral. "I made shepherd's pie," she said, holding out a glass dish. "And I wanted to remind you about the neighborhood association meeting tonight. We're discussing the community garden project." Robert took the dish mechanically. "Thanks, Margaret. I don't think I'll make it tonight." Her face fell slightly. "Robert, it's been months. You need to start reconnecting with people. Michael wouldn't want." "Don't." Robert cut her off, his voice sharper than intended. "Please don't tell me what my son would want." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm sorry. I just worry about you, that's all. The dish doesn't need to be returned." She turned and walked down the steps. Robert closed the door, setting the shepherd's pie on the kitchen counter. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Dave, his business partner. Another issue with the Henderson project. Another decision Robert couldn't bring himself to care about. He typed a perfunctory response and opened the refrigerator, which contained little besides condiments and a half-empty carton of milk, past its expiration date. Later that evening, hunger finally drove him out of the house. He got into his pickup truck and drove toward town. No particular destination in mind. The November air was crisp, trees mostly bare now, the occasional pile of brown leaves swirling in the street as he drove past. He ended up at Lakeside Park, a place he used to bring Michael for Little League games. Now, in the off-season, it was nearly deserted. Robert parked and walked toward the lake, hands thrust deep into his jacket pockets against the chill. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the water. He sat on a bench overlooking the shoreline, watching ducks glide across the surface. Movement caught his eye, a figure darting between the trash cans near the concession stand, which was closed for the season. Robert squinted. It was a boy, thin and ragged, methodically checking each bin. He pulled something out, a half-eaten sandwich, by the looks of it, and quickly devoured it. The boy couldn't have been more than 14 or 15, with dark hair falling into his eyes. Even from a distance, Robert could see how his clothes hung off his frame. The boy moved to another trash can, unaware of Robert's presence, his movements quick and practiced. This wasn't his first time scavenging for food. Robert felt something stir inside him, the first emotion besides grief or numbness he'd experienced in months. He stood up and walked toward the boy, who immediately tensed, looking ready to bolt. "Hey," Robert called softly, stopping several feet away. "Are you hungry?" The boy's eyes, wide and wary, met Robert's. For a moment, they stood frozen in tableau, a broken man and a starving boy, two souls adrift in a world that had failed them both. "I'm not going to hurt you," Robert said, keeping his distance. The boy remained poised to run, one foot slightly behind the other, his body coiled with tension. Up close, Robert could see the smudges of dirt on his face, the dark circles under his eyes, and the way his cheekbones protruded sharply beneath pale skin. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" Robert asked. The boy hesitated, then shrugged, eyes never leaving Robert's face. He looked ready to bolt at the slightest threatening movement. "There's a diner just down the road. I could buy you dinner." Robert gestured vaguely in the direction of town. "No strings attached. You can walk out any time." The boy's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why would you do that? His voice was rough, as if unused to speaking. There was a slight accent Robert couldn't place. Because you're hungry, Robert answered simply. And I've got money to spare. The boy seemed to calculate his options, glancing around the darkening park. The temperature was dropping rapidly with the sun, and a cold front was moving in. Weather report had mentioned possible snow, early for November, but not unheard of in Massachusetts. Fine, the boy finally said, but I'm walking there myself. I'll meet you. Robert nodded. Blue pickup in the lot. I'll wait for you. To his surprise, the boy actually showed up at Lou's diner 10 minutes after Robert was seated in a booth. He slid in opposite Robert, still wearing the threadbare jacket that did little to disguise his thin frame. Up close and under the fluorescent lights, he looked even younger, maybe 14. His dark hair was matted, and a small scar crossed his right eyebrow. The waitress, Doreen, approached with menus. She'd known Robert for years. This was where he and Michael often stopped after baseball games. Haven't seen you in a while, Rob, she said, then looked curiously at the boy. This is, Robert began, then realized he didn't know the boy's name. Just a friend, the boy filled in quickly. Can I get a cheeseburger? With fries. And a chocolate milkshake. Doreen nodded, writing it down. And for you, Rob? Coffee's fine. After she left, an awkward silence fell between them. The boy's eyes darted around the diner, taking in exits, other patrons, potential threats. You got a name? Robert asked. The boy's attention snapped back. Does it matter? I guess not. I'm Robert. The boy said nothing, just picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. How long have you been on your own? Robert tried again. Long enough. You have family looking for you? A bitter smile crossed the boy's face. No. The food arrived quickly. The boy ate with the focused intensity of someone who didn't know when his next meal would come, yet there was a restraint to it, as if he was trying not to appear too desperate. You can order more if you're still hungry after, Robert said. The boy paused mid-bite. Why are you doing this? Robert watched him for a moment, unsure himself. I lost my son. Recently. You reminded me of him, I guess. Sorry, the boy said automatically, then returned to his food. You sleeping outside? Robert asked. The boy shrugged. Sometimes. There's an abandoned warehouse by the railroad tracks. Not too bad if you know where to avoid the leaks. Robert nodded, picturing the old Hartman Textiles building on the edge of town. It had been slated for demolition for years, but budget issues kept delaying it. It's supposed to snow tonight, Robert said. I'll manage. The boy's tone was flat, matter-of-fact. He'd clearly been managing for some time. Robert watched him eat, feeling an increasingly strong pull toward the stranger. It wasn't just that the boy was approximately Michael's age. There was something in his determined self-sufficiency, the wariness in his eyes that spoke of wounds beneath the surface. I have a spare room, Robert heard himself say. Clean, warm. You could stay the night. Leave in the morning if you want. The boy stopped eating, staring at Robert with renewed suspicion. People don't just offer strangers a place to stay. I'm not people. I'm just. Robert paused, searching for the right words. I'm just trying to do one good thing. After months of nothing. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, delicate crystals melting against the diner windows. The boy watched them, then looked back at Robert, a decision forming behind his eyes. One night, he said finally, and I'm keeping the door locked. The drive back to Robert's house was quiet except for the soft swish of windshield wipers sweeping away snowflakes. The boy stared out the window, seemingly memorizing the route, an instinct born of necessity, Robert guessed. Always know your escape path. Bathrooms upstairs, first door on the left, Robert said as they entered the house. Spare room is at the end of the hall. The boy stood in the entryway, taking in the framed family photos on the wall. Robert with his late wife, Sarah, at their wedding. Michael in his baseball uniform. The three of them on a fishing trip at Lake Winnipesaukee. That your son? He asked, nodding toward a picture of Michael. Robert's throat tightened. Yeah, Michael. How'd he die? The question was blunt, without pretense. Car accident. Drunk driver crossed the center line. 7 months ago. The boy nodded, as if confirming something to himself. And his mom? Cancer. 3 years ago. So it's just you now. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact, one survivor recognizing another. Yeah, Robert said. Just me. He showed the boy to the spare room, a simple guest room with a double bed, dresser, and desk. It was neutral, impersonal, the only room in the house without memories attached to it. There are clean towels in the bathroom cabinet if you want to shower, Robert said. I might have some clothes that could fit you. The boy nodded, still standing stiffly just inside the doorway. I'll be downstairs if you need anything, Robert added, then left him alone. In the kitchen, Robert leaned against the counter, wondering what the hell he was doing. He'd invited a complete stranger, a minor no less, into his home. The boy could rob him blind in the night, or worse. Yet Robert couldn't bring himself to care about the risk. The worst had already happened to him. What more could he lose? He heard the shower running upstairs and busied himself, making hot chocolate, something he used to do for Michael on snowy nights. By the time the boy came downstairs, hair damp, and wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants that Robert had left outside the bathroom door, the hot chocolate was ready. Thought you might want something warm, Robert said, sliding a mug across the kitchen island. The boy approached cautiously, wrapping his hands around the mug, but not drinking yet. Thanks. You gonna tell me your name now? Robert asked. The boy took a sip of hot chocolate, considering. Alex, he finally said, though something in his tone suggested it might not be his real name. How old are you, Alex? 15. This time, Robert believed him. And how long have you been on your own? Alex shrugged. About 8 months. Parents. Mom died when I was 10. Dad. He trailed off, his face hardening. Not in the picture. Robert nodded, not pressing for details. The tight set of Alex's jaw told him enough. You from Worcester originally? Alex shook his head. Connecticut. New Haven. Long way to travel on your own. Needed to get away. Alex's eyes flicked up to meet Robert's. You ask a lot of questions. Just trying to figure out if I need to be worried about police looking for you. They're not, Alex said firmly. No one is. They drank their hot chocolate in silence for a while, the only sound the soft patter of snow against the windows and the occasional creak of the old house settling. I should call you something besides Alex, Robert said finally, since we both know that's not your name. A flicker of surprise crossed the boy's face. How about Michael? Robert suggested, the name falling from his lips before he could consider the implications. Just for while you're here. The boy stared at him, hot chocolate forgotten. You want to call me by your dead son's name? The bluntness of the question hit Robert like a physical blow. What was he thinking? It was bizarre, inappropriate, possibly even cruel to both the memory of his son and to this boy sitting across from him. I'm sorry, Robert said quickly. I shouldn't have suggested it. But the boy was studying him with an intensity that made Robert uncomfortable, as if seeing through him to the broken pieces inside. Is that why you brought me here? He asked. To replace him? No, Robert answered honestly. I brought you here because you were hungry and cold. The rest. He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I haven't since Michael died. The boy's expression softened slightly. I get it. When my mom died, my dad started calling me by his brother's name sometimes. His brother who died in Afghanistan. He'd get drunk and confused. He trailed off, but the implication was clear. It hadn't been a benign confusion. You can call me Michael if you want, the boy said suddenly. Just for tonight, if it helps you. Robert felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. Why would you do that? The boy, Michael, for tonight, shrugged. You bought me dinner. Gave me a place to sleep. It's just a name. I've been called worse. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in a blanket of white, muffling the sounds of the night. Inside, 2 broken people sat in a kitchen that had been silent for too long, each holding a piece of the other's pain. Robert woke to the unfamiliar sound of movement in his house. For a moment, still caught in the haze between sleep and wakefulness, He thought it might be Michael, his Michael, getting ready for school. Then reality crashed back, and he remembered the boy sleeping in his spare room. The digital clock on his nightstand read 6:42 a.m. Robert pulled on a robe and made his way downstairs to find the boy, who he'd called Michael last night, in a moment of either clarity or madness, standing in the kitchen. "Thought I'd be gone?" the boy asked, correctly reading Robert's surprised expression. "Wouldn't have blamed you if you were," Robert replied. Outside, nearly 6 inches of snow blanketed the yard, unusual for early November. The morning light reflected off it, casting the kitchen in a bright, ethereal glow. "Made coffee," the boy said, gesturing to the pot. "Hope that's okay." "More than okay. Thanks." Robert poured himself a cup, studying the boy over the rim. In daylight, with a night of proper sleep and clean clothes, he looked less feral, though the wariness remained in his eyes. "Sleep all right?" The boy nodded. "Best in months." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, both aware that whatever arrangement they'd made was meant to end with the morning. "School?" Robert asked finally. "Haven't been since I left home." 8 months is a long time to miss. The boy shrugged. "I was pretty good at it before. Wouldn't take much to catch up." Robert leaned against the counter. "You planning to go back? To school, I mean. Hard to enroll when you're living in an abandoned warehouse." The boy's tone was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. "Need an address, guardian signature, records from your previous school." "Right." Robert sipped his coffee. "You hungry?" "I could eat." Robert began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. Eggs, bacon, the basics. The boy watched him, then stepped forward. "I can help," he said. "I used to cook. Before." Robert handed him the carton of eggs. "Scrambled okay?" They worked together in surprisingly comfortable silence, falling into an easy rhythm, Robert handling the bacon, while the boy whisked eggs with practiced efficiency. It felt strangely natural, this shared domesticity with a stranger whose real name he didn't even know. As they sat down to eat, Robert's phone buzzed. A text from Dave. "Site meeting at Henderson Project at 9. You coming?" Robert stared at the message. Before yesterday, he would have sent a noncommittal reply and spent another day moving through the world like a ghost. Now, with this boy sitting across from him, something had shifted. "I have to go to work," he said, looking up from his phone. "Construction site across town." The boy nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Thanks for the bed. And breakfast." "You could stay," Robert heard himself say. "Just until the weather clears." The boy's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Why?" It was the same question from last night, but now in the harsh light of day. It required a more substantial answer. "Because you need somewhere to stay," Robert said. "And I need." He trailed off, unsure how to articulate what he needed. A purpose, a distraction, some way to atone for not being able to save his own son. Someone to call Michael. The boy finished for him, but there was no accusation in his tone. "No," Robert said firmly. That was wrong of me to ask. I don't expect that. You're not him. You're you. And who is that exactly?" The question seemed directed more at himself than at Robert. "Whoever you want to be," Robert answered. "Look, I have a spare room that's sitting empty. You need a place to stay. It doesn't have to be complicated." The boy studied him, searching for hidden motives. "What's in it for you?" Robert considered the question. "Company, maybe. A reason to come home instead of working until midnight. I don't know. And if I say no, then I give you a ride wherever you want to go, and we both move on." The boy was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Robert could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes. The risk assessment, the cost-benefit analysis that survival on the streets had taught him. 2 weeks, the boy said finally, "until I figure out next steps." Robert nodded, relief flooding through him. 2 weeks. And I'm not pretending to be your son. I wouldn't ask you to. The boy extended his hand across the table. "My real name is Ethan." Robert took his hand, feeling the first tendrils of something like hope unfurling in his chest. "Nice to meet you, Ethan." 3 hours later, Robert stood on the Henderson Project site, actually paying attention to the construction issues Dave was pointing out for the first time in months. His mind kept drifting back to Ethan, alone in his house. He'd given the boy, Ethan, he corrected himself, his Wi-Fi password and told him to help himself to anything in the kitchen. "You seem different today," Dave commented as they walked through the half-finished office building. "More present." Robert shrugged. "Maybe I am." "Good," Dave said simply. "Been worried about you, man." By the time Robert returned home in the early afternoon, he half expected Ethan to be gone, perhaps along with his television or other valuables. Instead, he found the boy sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by textbooks. "Found these in the study," Ethan explained, holding up an algebra textbook. "Thought I'd see how much I remember." Robert recognized Michael's school books, carefully packed away with the rest of his things. Somehow, seeing them spread out again, being used, didn't hurt as much as he would have expected. "And?" Robert asked, setting down his keys. "It's coming back," Ethan said. "I was in advanced math before I left." Robert nodded, noticing a notebook filled with neat, methodical problem-solving. "You're good at it." "Used to dream of being an engineer," Ethan said, then looked down, as if embarrassed by the admission. "Stupid, I guess." "Why stupid?" "Hard to become an engineer when you don't even have a middle school diploma." Robert sat on the couch, studying the boy who had, in the space of 24 hours, begun to fill the emptiness of his house with something other than grief. "What if you could go back to school?" he asked. Ethan looked up, suspicion immediately returning to his features. "How?" "I don't know the details yet," Robert admitted. "But there must be options. GED programs. Alternative schools. You need to be 18 for a GED. Or have parent permission." Ethan's voice was flat. "And I'm not going back to my father, if that's what you're suggesting." "That's not what I'm suggesting," Robert said quickly. "There must be other ways. Social services, maybe." Ethan's expression hardened. "Foster care, you mean?" "No thanks. I'll take my chances on the street." The vehemence in his voice told Robert everything he needed to know about Ethan's fear of the system. Whatever had driven this boy from his home was serious enough that he preferred homelessness to official intervention. "Okay," Robert said, backing off. "No social services. But there has to be some solution that doesn't involve you giving up on your education." For the first time, something like hope flickered across Ethan's face. Maybe. That evening, they ate takeout Chinese food in front of the TV, watching a baseball game without really following it. The domesticity of the scene was both comforting and surreal, a parody of normalcy that somehow felt more genuine than anything Robert had experienced since the accident. "My son used to pitch," Robert said during a commercial break, nodding toward the screen. "Had a scholarship offer from Boston College." Ethan looked at him sideways. "You don't have to talk about him if it's too hard." "Actually," Robert said, surprised to find it was true, "I'd like to." A week passed, settling into an unexpected routine. Robert went to work, really went to work, engaging with projects, making decisions, staying for full days instead of drifting in and out. Ethan stayed at the house, dividing his time between Michael's old textbooks and helping around the property. Robert had come home one day to find the gutters cleaned of leaves and the walkway shoveled clear of the remaining snow. "You didn't have to do that," Robert had said. "Earning my keep," Ethan had replied with a shrug. They circled each other cautiously at first, both aware of the strangeness of their arrangement, but gradually finding comfort in shared spaces and simple conversations. Robert learned that Ethan was smart, remarkably so, with a quick mind and natural aptitude for mathematics and sciences. Ethan, in turn, seemed to absorb Robert's occasional stories about construction, asking thoughtful questions about architectural support systems and load-bearing calculations. Neither of them spoke much about their pasts. Robert didn't press for details about Ethan's father or what had driven him to flee his home. Ethan didn't ask about the circumstances of Michael's accident or how Robert had coped afterward. They existed together in the present tense, an unspoken agreement to focus on the day at hand rather than the shadows behind them. On the 8th day, Robert came home to find Ethan standing in Michael's bedroom doorway, looking in but not entering. "Sorry," Ethan said, stepping back quickly when he noticed Robert. "I wasn't snooping. The door was open." "It's okay," Robert said, though his chest tightened reflexively. "You can go in if you want." Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. "Doesn't feel right." Robert understood. For all the strange intimacy of their living arrangement, certain boundaries remained sacred. Michael's room was a shrine of sorts, and they both recognized it as such. "He played baseball," Ethan said, nodding toward the trophies visible from the doorway. "Since he was 6, Robert confirmed. Had the best curveball in the county by the time he was 14. "I used to play basketball," Ethan offered. "Not on a team or anything. Just at the court near my apartment complex." It was the first personal detail he'd volunteered about his life before. Robert accepted it like the gift it was, a small token of trust. "There's a hoop in the driveway," he said. "Hasn't been used in a while, but the ball's probably still in the garage." Later that evening, the rhythmic bounce of a basketball on concrete drifted through the house. Robert stood at the kitchen window, watching Ethan shoot free throws in the glow of the driveway light. His form was good, his concentration absolute. For a moment, with his back turned and his slight frame silhouetted against the night, he could almost have been Michael. But he wasn't, and somehow, that was becoming okay. The next morning, Robert received a call from Margaret, his neighbor. "I saw a boy playing basketball in your driveway last night," she said without preamble. "Tall, thin, dark hair." Robert hesitated. How to explain Ethan's presence without inviting questions he couldn't answer? "He's staying with me for a while," he said finally. "A friend's son, having some family troubles." The lie felt strange on his tongue, but not as strange as the truth would have sounded. "That's good, Robert," Margaret said, her voice warm with approval. "It's not healthy, being alone in that house all the time. You should bring him to the neighborhood cookout this weekend." Cookout. Robert had forgotten entirely about the annual Veterans Day neighborhood gathering. Saturday at noon. The Johnsons' backyard. Everyone's bringing something. "I've got you down for your potato salad." Robert hadn't attended a social event since the funeral. The thought of making small talk with neighbors, while they cast sympathetic glances, his way made his stomach clench. But then he thought of Ethan, who had spent months in isolation of a different kind. "We'll be there," he heard himself say. That evening, he broached the subject with Ethan over dinner. "Neighborhood cookout this Saturday. My neighbor insists we go." Ethan looked up from his plate, wariness immediately returning to his features. You don't have to," Robert added quickly. "But it might be good. For both of us." "What did you tell her about me?" "That you're a friend's son, staying with me for a while, having family troubles." Ethan considered this, fork tapping against his plate. "Not entirely a lie." "No," Robert agreed. "Not entirely." "What's my name in this story?" The question hung between them, fraught with meaning. In the week they'd spent together, Robert had been careful to call him Ethan, to separate this living, breathing boy from the ghost of his son. But to the outside world, what would he be? "Ethan," Robert said firmly. "You're Ethan." Something like relief flickered across the boy's face. "Okay, I'll go." The cookout was exactly as Robert had feared, and exactly what they both needed. Neighbors welcomed him back to the land of the living with barely concealed surprise and genuine warmth. Questions about Ethan were met with the practice story, which the boy himself delivered with surprising conviction when asked directly. "How long will you be staying with Robert?" Mrs. Johnson asked as she served Ethan a hamburger. "Not sure yet," he answered smoothly. "Depends on how things go with my dad." Robert, overhearing, marveled at how easily Ethan navigated these social waters, presenting a version of himself that was neither wholly true nor completely false. A skill learned from necessity, he supposed. They were preparing to leave when Dave, Robert's business partner, arrived with his wife. His eyebrows rose at the sight of Ethan. "Robert, didn't expect to see you here." His eyes moved to Ethan. "And who's this?" "This is Ethan," Robert said. "He's staying with me for a while." Dave's expression shifted, recognition dawning. "You're the reason he's been coming to work regularly this week." Ethan looked uncomfortable under the scrutiny. "I guess." "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up," Dave said, clapping Robert on the shoulder. It's good to have you back, man. Walking home, the autumn sun warm on their backs, Ethan was quiet. You okay? Robert asked. They all look at you like you're broken, Ethan said finally. And me like I don't know. Some kind of solution. Robert considered this. Maybe I was broken. Maybe I still am. And maybe you are a kind of solution, just not in the way they think. I'm not your son, Ethan said, the words coming out in a rush. I can't replace him. I know that, Robert said quietly. I don't want you to. Then what do you want? They stopped walking, facing each other on the leaf-strewn sidewalk, the question hanging between them. I want, Robert began, then paused, searching for the right words. I want to help you. And maybe, in helping you, I help myself too. Is that so terrible? Ethan studied him, eyes narrowed against the sun. My dad used to say nothing comes free. There's always a price. Some things do, Robert countered. Some things you give without expecting anything back. That's what being a parent is supposed to be. And is that what you're trying to be? A parent? The question struck Robert like a physical blow. Was that what he was doing? Trying to reclaim the role that had been taken from him when Michael died? I don't know what I'm trying to be, he admitted. I'm just doing what feels right day by day. That's all any of us can do. Ethan seemed to accept this answer, nodding slowly. The 2 weeks are almost up. They are, Robert acknowledged, heart sinking at the reminder of their agreement. I've been thinking, Ethan said, kicking at a pile of leaves. Maybe I could stay a bit longer, if that's okay with you. Relief flooded through Robert. More than okay. They resumed walking, the silence between them now comfortable rather than strained. As they approached the house, Robert noticed Margaret, watching from her porch. She waved, and Robert waved back, Ethan following suit after a moment's hesitation. She thinks you're good for me, Robert said as they entered the house. Am I? Ethan asked, the question surprisingly vulnerable. Robert thought about the past week, the gradual return to work, to routine, to something approaching normalcy. The house that had felt like a mausoleum now hummed with quiet life. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had shifted somehow, making room for something else. Something like hope. Yeah, he said. I think you are. That night, Robert stood in the doorway of the spare room, Ethan's room now, watching the boy sleep. In repose, the weariness left his features, making him look younger, more vulnerable. Not Michael, never Michael, but someone who, against all odds, had begun to matter. Good night, Ethan, Robert whispered, and quietly closed the door.